Look at that. I wasn't even in my own stream. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. How are you all doing? I hope you're doing well. Welcome to the program. It's your host, Danny Dhaiphong, and we have a wonderful, great show for you today. Before I get started, though, you know what to do here. Please hit that like button. I appreciate all of your support, all of your viewership. Hitting that like button helps increase that viewership significantly. It helps boost this stream in the algorithm and is very much appreciated. You should also, if you are new to this channel, subscribe. I am less than 850 or about 800 subscribers away now from 100,000. Again, thanks to all of you for making such a thing possible. It is truly an amazing accomplishment that I could not have done without all of you. So please do hit that subscribe button if you have not. Some of you should check if you're still subscribed because sometimes YouTube likes to unsubscribe. But with all of that said, give me a quick sound check. How am I doing? Quick sound check. I really appreciate it. Hope it sounds okay. Sometimes my mic has a mind of its own and the volume is different depending on the stream. So with all of that said, we have a packed stream today. We have first, I'm going to talk about Zelensky's trip to the United States. We're going to talk about the UN General Assembly. We're also going to talk about his trip to Washington, which happened as of this date. We're going to get into the disaster that it was, how the neocons are really contemplating cutting Zelensky and Ukraine off. This is something that may not be happening publicly just yet, but it is certainly brewing. It is certainly stirring. And the political situation in the United States is not helping. I'm going to get into what is going on. And then I'm going to talk about these wonder weapons. NATO is continuing to promise more and more weapons to Ukraine. These weapons continue to fall short. And they also are now talking about the collective West is talking about how aid is going to diminish. So this is not just this is not just banter here. This is actually going to happen. Aid to Ukraine is going to fall across the collective West, including militarily. And I'm going to talk about what the mainstream media is saying about this. And lastly, I'm going to talk about the flurry. So oftentimes Ukraine undermines a flurry of global developments in the multipolar world that are so critical. And China, of course, is always in the lead when it comes to this phenomenon. And there have been a flurry of diplomatic achievements, accomplishments, and really just huge moves that strike at the heart and trigger immense fear from the collective West, from the imperial powers over the development of this multipolar world. So we have a lot to get to. Please do hit the like button. It's going to be a fun stream tonight. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. And also, I am still raising funds, trying to increase the income here to generate for support to those who are assisting me, as well as to cover the costs of both running this program and also getting me out into the world so I can do some reporting elsewhere. I'm going to Vietnam in mid-October in about 3 weeks. So I am raising some funds for that trip. You can best support this channel on Patreon, of course, as an annual member or a monthly member, patreon.com/DannyHaiFong. But there are so many other options as well. If Patreon is not for you, you can be a YouTube member at $5 a month. But even better, you can become a Substack member. You should always subscribe for free on Substack, but you can become a Substack member for an annual amount or a monthly amount. And that gets you all of the perks that you could want, archives of articles, as well as instant notifications so you don't have to rely on YouTube. So Substack is great, and you can also buy me a coffee, PayPal, and all the one-time options. All of that is in the video description. But with that said, everybody, how about we get started? First, welcome everyone who is in the chat. Thank you so much to all of the moderators. It is truly great to have your support in regulating the chat and making that experience as good as it can be. given that it can get quite intense in there. All right, everybody. All right. Let us get started, okay? Because we have a lot to get to. And I have a lot of announcements that I'm actually going to save at the end of the program. So let's begin. Volodymyr Zelensky is in big trouble. And when I say Volodymyr Zelensky, I don't just mean Zelensky himself, but the entire Ukraine proxy war that is led by, provoked by, and of course fueled by Nato. Volodymyr Zelensky came to Washington, D.C., first made a stop to New York City for the UN General Assembly the week of the 18th of September. And again, the UN General Assembly and the United Nations as a whole was hijacked by the Ukraine situation, the Ukraine proxy war. Unsurprising. But unlike in past instances where Zelensky made a trip to Washington, for example, or to the United States to meet with Biden or to the UN, this time around, Ukraine is in a much different situation. Unlike a year ago, or even more than a year ago, a year and a half or so ago, Ukraine is no longer in the driver's seat in terms of the narrative. The collective West has fueled and armed to the teeth Ukraine 3 different times. We're talking about 3 different militaries have been supplied up until this point in the conflicts. It's February 2022, and all of them have been decimated by Russia. Now, the latest situation is this counteroffensive, which is indeed a failure. More than 60,000, almost 70,000 people, Ukrainian forces killed in action, meaning they are dead, they are gone, a massive amount in just about 3 months. Also, much of NATO's weaponry that was supplied to Ukraine has been destroyed. And now the United States is facing a very unstable political situation, the United States being the albatross, the head of NATO, and of course, the head of this proxy war. And that political situation runs the risk of destroying the very basis for this proxy war, which is the constant supply of weaponry and aid to Ukraine. So now the mood has cooled. The neocons across the political aisle in Washington are no longer as enthusiastic as they once were. You have seen on this program many different analysts come as guests, as well as myself, talk about how the mainstream Western corporate media, from the New York Times, The Economist, Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, you can go on and on and on. Just read what they are all saying. They're all talking about a long war, a war of attrition, how this conflict is now not going to be resolved by any kind of Ukrainian offensive, but by a long-term push against Russia that could be in the amount of years. Now, Ukraine doesn't have years, and it never had years if this counteroffensive is any kind of measure. But that, of course, was never the point. The point was that Ukraine was supposed to win. They were supposed to succeed, and Zelensky was supposed to be the puppet that made the United States and NATO look good on the world stage again, and that was supposed to stick a thumb in the Russian bear's eyes and destroy what has become a thorn in the side of the collective West, which is a more powerful, more independent, and more sovereign Russia. None of that has occurred, and none of that will occur. And now the tune has changed, and it's even worse than what I had just described. It's worse than just talking about a war of attrition, a long war, etc. Now they're talking about this visit by Zelensky as being essentially a completely different kind of venture. And I'm going to show you why. So the collective West, and I'm going to show you first, actually, how Kevin McCarthy, the House Speaker, so this is really important. Kevin McCarthy, the House Speaker, he has been probably the most vocal against Ukraine aid within the neocon foreign policy establishment. And mind you, everyone at this level politically in the United States and Washington is a neocon. Nonetheless, the words are beginning to matter. And Zelensky came to Washington on September 21st, Thursday, where he was introduced, or he was coming off the heels of a flurry of news stories talking about how this time it's going to be different. And look at here. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy demands accountability from Zelensky. This is a lot different from his current Congress visit and the reception he received from Nancy Pelosi when she was Speaker of the House. He wants to check or to talk to the Ukrainian president before writing another check to Kiev. So U.S. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy refused to commit another $24 billion to Ukraine, telling reporters that he has some questions for Volodymyr Zelensky first. While the existing budget for Kiev is drying up, disagreement on authorizing another funding package threatens to grind Washington to a halt. And mind you, this is par for the course for domestic Washington politics. There's always the possibility of a so-called government freeze, shutdown, and it usually is over budgetary concerns in which political party is trying to withhold some kind of money. Usually it's for social programs, but this time it's to a conflict that doesn't have any kind of off switch for the spigot. So Zelensky is due to meet lawmakers on Capitol Hill during a visit on Washington this Thursday. Ahead of the meeting, McCarthy was asked on Tuesday whether he would pledge the $124 billion in military and economic aid to the Ukrainian president, as Joe Biden requested. Is Zelensky elected to Congress? McCarthy responded. Is he our president? I don't think I have to commit anything, and I think I have questions for him. Where is the accountability on the money we've already spent? What is the plan for victory? I think that's what the American public wants to know. So this is important because right after this story broke, here is Axios. When Zelensky finally arrived to Washington and attempted to meet with Congress, McCarthy wouldn't allow an address. So I think you remember when Zelensky visited in 2022, when he visited during Nancy Pelosi's reign as Speaker of the House, he received a warm reception across the political aisle, claps, the flag. He came in his war fatigues, and there was no challenge. Now, we fast forward to today, and it's a lot different. McCarthy wouldn't let Zelensky joint address the Congress during his D.C. visit. Why does it matter? Zelensky asked for a joint session, and we just didn't have time. He's already given a joint session, said McCarthy on Thursday. Zelensky last visited Washington last December to meet with President Biden, hold a press conference at the White House, and hold a joint session of Congress. That happened last December before things started to go awry. So, of course, the Western mainstream media has been talking about this moment for quite some time as it has built up. And here is an Indian publication, the Hindu Business Line, saying for Zelensky, this Washington visit is different. The support for Ukraine in Washington seems to be weakening. Biden is also weighed down by domestic issues. It is now slowly becoming official that after an in-person appearance at the UN Assembly to lobby world leaders for more support for Ukraine, which we're going to get to, I'm going to show you the foolishness of what that was, how Zelensky behaved, which plays into why the neocons are starting to slowly but surely withdraw its support for Zelensky's antics. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky will be on his way to D.C., so he's going to visit. And at a recent meeting with Zelensky in Kiev, U.S. Secretary of State Blinken assured the Ukrainian leader that Washington is determined to continue to walk side by side with Ukraine. There are at least three aspects to a changed Washington that Zelensky must be aware of. First, the U.S. is not fully sold on the Ukrainian counteroffensive claims of the last several weeks, with apprehension on the extent of the recapture of Zelensky's forces. Also, Moscow has not been taken kindly to a U.S. decision to supply cluster munitions that have been banned by many countries, and more recently on providing armor-piercing depleted uranium anti-tank rounds for M1 Abrams tank. Russians called it a criminal act. The U.S. decision in Europe to provide new weaponry, including F-16 jets, has not gone unnoticed by the Kremlin. With Russia nowhere near losing the war, being showing signs of exhaustion, the perception is one of Putin playing it out for as long as possible, pinning his hopes on the West, eventually losing a war of nerves. And this is causing within Washington consternation because they underestimated Russia. How many times have we said that on this program? Underestimating Russia was always going to be a folly. And look at what's happening. Putin, Russia, they're willing right? Russia is willing to, the war of attrition was Russia's strategy, not Ukraine's. The fact that they're trying to shift the narrative means that there's big trouble and it's starting to have consequences. So now the environment at Capitol Hill has to worry Zelensky, and we just saw the results of that. Ukrainian leader is visiting a time when some U.S. lawmakers are clearly exhibiting signs of exasperation, issuing blank checks, especially when at loggerheads over spending for domestic programs. It is not just hardline Trump Republicans getting uneasy over the Ukraine spending. There are some murmurs within the Democratic Party as well. And so we're talking about the Biden administration of already having provided 76.8 billion in assistance to Ukraine, with military aid alone accounting for nearly 50 billion at 46.6 billion. Now Congress is debating an additional 24 billion in military and humanitarian assistance, and Kevin McCarthy is looking at the prospect of separating Ukraine assistance from the federal package to avert a shutdown on September 30th. And now, thirdly, he's coming to Washington at the time, or he came to Washington when impeachment of President Biden is perking up, with lawmakers hanging on the coattails of a former president determined to drag the Democratic president through a vexing process that Democrats made President Trump endure not once, but twice. And this is in reference to also Hunter Biden's indictment for all of the various crimes that he has committed. So that was a Hindu business line setting up somewhat of the environment. And all of those factors are very relevant. The domestic political situation in Washington is deteriorating, and the battlefield situation and the prospects for Ukrainian victory have all but gone up in smoke. There is no way this counteroffensive achieves anything except more losses on the side of Ukraine, and of course, more losses for NATO, particularly the United States, when it comes to where this aid is going. And you've seen, and I've covered this to some extent on this program, we've seen the carousel and the merry-go-round within Kiev's political administration now. First, we had Reznikov have to resign, the defense minister, then the deputy defense ministers. I believe there are 6 of them had to resign. And of course, there was that Ukrainian Armed Forces spokesperson, the trans-American, very odd situation there. But nonetheless, she was kicked on her can because of threats she made to journalists that really did smear and I think put a bad taste in the United States' mouth when they're trying to tell Kiev to cool it. Here she is saying, we're going to hunt down Russians and independent journalists and anyone we don't like who says anything about the war we don't like. Doesn't look too good. So with that said, the Hill also had warnings for Zelensky as he came in. As GOP skepticism grows, Zelensky faces a tough task. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky will travel to Washington. So he traveled to Washington on Thursday when support is waning from the Republicans. The Capitol Hill are going to battle over whether how to avoid a government shutdown, and this is going to have implications for Ukraine. So those are the issues. But now the question is, and this is what is so interesting about Volodymyr Zelensky, the question is, how will Zelensky approach this? Will he be more careful, more tactful? Will he begin to play the role he was always supposed to play, which was puppet? He was always supposed to be a puppet. He was supposed to do whatever the United States and NATO said, say yes when asked any questions, say no when he's supposed to say no, say yes when he's supposed to say yes. Zelensky has not done any of that. And now the Washington Post, and here's an interesting piece, the Washington Post said, Washington, don't even try to tell Zelensky to compromise. So here you have the neocons, all of them, from Blinken to Biden, now McCarthy, all of these forces, version, whether it's whispering in the background, backdoor meetings, back channel meetings, and Kevin McCarthy, of course, more publicly for political reasons, making this an issue. They're all saying this needs to cool down. Maybe this needs to freeze. Maybe aid needs to be reduced. Maybe it needs to be held off. Something needs to change. Well, here you have the Washington Post saying, don't even try telling Zelensky to compromise. If anyone on Capitol Hill and the White House thinks Ukrainian President Zelensky, when he visits Washington, can be talked into ultimately accepting anything less than the ejection of Russian forces from his country, forget it. The Ukrainian people, despite the depredations they have endured over the last 19 months, are adamant in their determination to oust the invaders. A negotiated settlement or ceasefire is simply unthinkable. That was my overwhelming sense, gleaned from talking with a broad swath of Ukrainians during a week-long visit. So this is the narrative of those who want to keep the war going. That this columnist, he said he went to Ukraine. He talked about all the horrors. I'm not going to get into the article because it really isn't too interesting. It is simply just, right? It is really democracy dying in darkness. That's what the Washington Post is. So that's the argument that's being made. But, well, of course, this argument of, well, Washington shouldn't even ask because there's so much moral superiority on the Ukraine side, despite, of course, all those SS symbols and all those Azov, Neo, NAZIs, despite all of that, there's some moral high ground here that Ukraine is liberating itself from some kind of invader. Regardless of the errors of that argument, there is a truth to that headline that I think is not being talked about. That headline could also read, in terms of the content afterward, as a fact. And why is it a fact? It's because Zelensky himself has operated and acted in a way where his entire existence hinges upon this conflict maintaining some kind of made up moral superiority, a public relations stunt that positions himself as a powerful so-called democratic actor being led around by his democratic masters, that in a crusade against the so-called aggressor Russia. Without that, Zelensky is nothing. So Zelensky has been put in a very interesting position. On the one hand, he's supposed to do whatever his NATO masters, whatever the United States says, the neocons, whatever they say he's supposed to do. But on the other hand, if they want to cool things down, he can't afford for that to happen because his entire existence is predicated upon it. There is no possibility of Zelensky maintaining any kind of semblance of leadership in Ukraine or anywhere else. He'll be on a jet somewhere else if the conflict were to be frozen. He needs the conflict. He needs this war to go on. He needs Ukrainian armed forces and the tens of thousands to die on the front lines if he is going to survive politically. So that could indeed be how that headline could be explained. It's not all of this stuff that the Washington Post is trying to sell you. It's the fact that Zelensky indeed does need this war, and without it, he is nothing. And because of that, there's going to be no compromise from the Ukraine side. And we already know Russia's position is that Russia says, we're going to determine the outcome of this conflict. We're not going to get into some kind of Minsk 3.0 again. But now I want to talk to you about how this was all confirmed. Zelensky's behavior. You would think the neocons are telling him. Blinken has told him. You hear Mark Milley. You hear Kevin McCarthy. All these neocon foreign policy establishment forces and of course, their handlers, those who do their bidding in Washington, they're all saying something kind of similar here. They're saying, cool it, freeze it. Let's move a little slower. We'll continue to support you for as long as it takes, but it's going to be as long as it takes. Not, you lost the offensive, that's it. Now we've got to do some damage control. Did Zelensky act like that at the UN General Assembly when he went before his visit to Washington? Absolutely not. And let me show you just how foolish Zelensky acted, which just puts more, I think, it fans the flames. It really does add more fuel to the fire that is Zelensky being a liability for the collective West. So here is Zelensky. He was supposed to meet with Brazilian President Lula da Silva. And remember, at the G7 summit, where Lula also attended, even though Brazil is not a G7 member, but there are other leaders there, Zelensky was supposed to meet with Lula then. And what did he do? He ghosted Lula da Silva. Now, look at how Zelensky treats Lula da Silva, and they were supposed to meet again. It got canceled, and here's why. Look at this. Look at how Volodymyr Zelensky does not clap. Everyone else is clapping. It's a packed room. People are being respectful and courteous, and Zelensky is making a scene, not clapping for Lula da Silva. Here we go. making a scene as Lula is speaking. And there you have again, there's the clapping, and there you have Zelensky pouting in the corner. So this this was not taken very well by Lula da Silva. The meeting at the UN General Assembly on the sidelines was canceled. Lula da Silva said, no, we're not going to be treated like that, and allow such a meeting to occur. Now I'm going to pull up what Zelensky said at the UN, which just underscores how Zelensky will never give up his vice grip over the narrative of this conflict, regardless of how much it's needed, how much the collective West and the neocons are telling him, stop it. You need to tone it down and start to play your cards right. And here's Che Bose over, I believe he's a journalist at RT. Here is him posting about some of the remarks, the highlights from Zelensky. Here we go.
Каждое десятилетие Россия начинает новую войну. Части Молдовы и Грузии остаются оккупированными. Россия превратилась...
Every decade, Russia starts a new war, says Zelensky. Of course, his NATO masters, the United States at the head, how many wars have they waged over the last couple decades? It's quite a lot. And if we include proxy wars, it's double figures. Here we go.
Сирию в руины. И если бы...
Right. This again, Syria was turned to ruins by Russia, not the US, NATO-backed, Israeli-backed forces, proxy forces, armed groups, jihadists that invaded the country on behalf of the collective West. No, not them. This is a puppet out of control.
Это не Россия. Химическое оружие никогда бы не было использовано в Сирии. Россия...
That's Dmitry Polanski. He is an ambassador. He's a Russian ambassador to the UN. That is classic. No one cares what Zelensky is saying, especially the Russian side.
Почти проглотила Белоруссию. Она явно угрожает Казахстану и Балтийским государствам.
So this is Zelensky. That was Zelensky showing who he is. He is just completely and rabidly, not just anti-Russia, but he is willing to promote the most egregious lies. He's willing to put Russia over what NATO and the United States has done, just stamp it with Russia in order to prove the worth of his, not even his lost cause, but the lost cause of his NATO masters. And that kind of behavior is exactly why it's this kind of behavior that makes the collective West more and more suspicious of Zelensky, that he's willing to try to almost play this world leader, world hero. That's not going to work when you're losing. And here he is again. This was probably the most disgusting thing that he said at the United Nations General Assembly. This is now on the United Nations Security Council, which he got a chance to speak. And mind you, Sergei Lavrov was in the room, but Zelensky spoke first, and then Zelensky and the Ukraine side, they left the room before Lavrov had a chance to give his remarks with Zelensky present. So they didn't have the confrontation everyone was hoping they would have. But here you have Ukrainian soldiers are now doing in their blood what the UN Security Council should do with their votes, stopping aggression, defending the principles of the UN Charter. So this is someone who's literally sending Ukrainians to die in the tens of thousands in a failed counteroffensive, which is being fueled by the United States and NATO and has no reason to continue or to even have happened in the first place. And of course, we can go over the history where Zelensky and the United States and the UK tore up a peace agreement in April 2022. We can go all the way back then. All of this, right? All of this is being justified by Ukrainian blood. I don't know if there's anything more egregiously despicable than that, but here is him saying it.
Українські солдати зараз своєю кров'ю роблять те, що Рада безпеки ООН має робити своїми голосуваннями.
All right, so there's no subtitles to that, but that's the translation. Essentially, what is he saying? He is telling the world he's telling the UN Security Council that they need to do with their votes what Ukrainians are doing with their blood, using the deaths of Ukrainians to justify his, and of course, what really is his masters, his NATO masters, his neocon masters, to justify their failed project. But lastly, now I want to show you, and we're going to go back to our friend Che Bose again, because this is how pathetic it has gotten. It's all theatric, it's all political theater, and we know that Zelensky is well trained in theater. He's huge in the entertainment industry before becoming a politician. All of his biggest backers, his biggest billionaire backers, that's how they helped him get a career, and then that's who propelled him into the halls of power in Ukraine to take part in the coup government there. And here's Che Bose showing you how Ukrainian media spun this whole, and this is probably the most disgusting of the, of all of this, is Ukrainian TV edited a video of the hall to show Zelensky, even though this is not even disgusting. This is more just funny. They edited, and here's the full tweet, his UN General Assembly speech so that it looked like the crowd was more numerous than it really was bigger than it really was. But in doing so, they showed Zelensky listening to Zelensky. So here's Zelensky speaking. All right, here's the video. Zelensky is speaking, and you'll see Zelensky watching Zelensky speak. Here we go.
Не розгортати цю зброю, не розповсюджувати, не допускати погрози нею, не допускати тренування для того, щоб забезпечити ядерне роззброєння. І це хороша стратегія. Але вона не
There he is. Zelensky is watching himself speak at the UN General Assembly. There he is. You can see with my I think you can see my error on the screen, I believe. There he is. Maybe you can't. But there he is. Zelensky is watching Zelensky speak. I mean, it's piss poor editing. It's the worst editing. I mean, I'm not a video editor. I can't really edit for anything, but I know people who help me sometimes edit, and this is just bad.
повинна бути єдиною стратегією для того, щоб
Anyway, so we don't need to listen to the rest of him talking. But the point is, what is the point? Well, the point is that Ukrainian TV, and this is the narrative management, this is the problem with Zelensky, this is the problem with his regime, is that they rely on lies to justify what now is a failed project. And even when the neocons are saying, Zelensky, we got to cool it, you got to stop this corruption, you got to clean up, get rid of these guys, you might be one of those guys that needs to be getting rid of. But until then, and until we can stabilize things, you need to be the stable one. You need to look like you are playing the part you were hired to play. You're supposed to be the hero. You're supposed to be the so-called Democrat against the aggressor, against the authoritarian, the autocrat. You're supposed to be the hero of this story, and really you're just the zero of this story now. And it's making the United States and the rest of the collective West look terrible, because the United States and the collective West have actually sacrificed quite a lot. The U.S. a lot less, because what did the U.S. do? It went off the backs of Europe. It used Europe as a cudgel and as a kind of springboard for the United States to maintain a semblance of stability in this time. But the economic situation in the United States is not favorable. There is a huge polarization going on. Kevin McCarthy's comments, his rejection of Zelensky this time around, is also its kind of political theater, but it's political theater that matters in the sense that it sets the terrain up for what is to come for Ukraine, which is the neocon foreign policy establishment is saying in Zelensky's ear, in the Ukrainian regime's ear. They're saying this needs to cool down, this needs to slow down, this is going to be a years-long venture, and it's not going to look like the conflict that we had dreamt of. We dreamt of a conflict that would take Russia down. The sanctions would take Russia down. The front line would bog Russia down. We would get Russia's Vietnam, like the Soviet Union got its Vietnam and Afghanistan, and Russia would crumble. None of that has occurred. None of that will occur. And the collective West is starting to lick its chops, and it's starting to come to some semblance of reality. So now there's a debate. Now there is conversations, real conversation about whether it is to continue, which Blinken and these neocon forces, Newland, Sullivan, Biden, the Democrats, much of the Republicans, the Millies of the world, they all want aid to continue. The military contractors want aid to continue, but they can't justify it if Zelensky acts like a big baby, like a like a spoiled brat. Like, essentially, Zelensky is a spoiled actor, as Alex Christoforou from the Duran said on this program, and that's what he is. But when you act like that, it makes the masters look bad. It makes those who are actually setting the terrain, who are actually shaping the political and military environment, NATO, the collective West, at least on the side of Ukraine, it makes them look bad. And it makes Russia look better. And Russia has gained a lot diplomatically. It has gained a lot economically. Russia is going to grow 2% plus, more than all of Europe and slightly higher than the United States. So Russia is stabilizing. Russia is looking better. The world is not isolating Russia. The United States and the collective West is isolating themselves. And Ukraine and Zelensky is not helping. So his visit to Washington was a dud. Whether the $24 billion is agreed upon or not, that really is neither here nor there, because the situation on the battlefield is not good. It is unfavorable. It's not working out. And with that, well, comes the hard truth that Zelensky is going to get cut off from the neocons one way or the other, whether it's now or whether it is slightly later or whether it's somewhere in the future. But the path has been laid. The counteroffensive was a failure. This is now a war of attrition, which can only favor Russia. And Ukraine is, in fact, doomed. The only hope that Ukraine has is some kind of peaceful settlement, which will be resolved and done and led on Russia's terms. And so now it's a matter of, will the neocons finally cave to the pressure, or will they continue their suicide mission? My bets are they'll continue their suicide mission, but it's going to look a whole lot different, and Zelensky is by no means safe. So that's the end of the first that's the end of the first story, everybody. I have a lot of interesting announcements. I'll have great announcements at the end of the program, so please do stay here. Please do like the stream. We have 897 likes, 900 now, 3,000 viewers. Thank you so much for tuning in tonight. Now, the next story is a doozy, all right? This is very related. Very related. So keep liking the stream, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell if you're new here. And of course, you can support this work at patreon.com/DannyHaiFong. That's patreon.com/DannyHaiFong. You can also support this program and all the links in this video description. Buy me a coffee, one-time options, also Substack for monthly and annual. There's so many options. Go to the video description and support this program. Help keep independent media alive. All right. Let's get started. All right. Another story. This one is a doozy. This is it. Ukraine is out of options. The collective West has now basically made it clear in article after article, publication after publication, anonymous source after anonymous source, not so anonymous source after anonymous source, from Mark Milley to even Joe Biden himself, talking about how Ukraine, the aid to Ukraine is no longer guaranteed. We have Kevin McCarthy making a huge political scene now as the elections, the presidential elections, and of course the congressional elections come closer and closer, 2024. But there's a bigger problem for Ukraine, and that is that the wonder weapons, the NATO arsenal, the United States and its collective West vassals that they've supplied to Ukraine, It hasn't been effective. It's been burned through. There is nothing left. And so what that has meant is that the counteroffensive that Ukraine has waged for over 3 months now has also burnt out. It's fizzled out. It really has been a disaster of epic proportions when you think about the massive losses, upwards of 66,000 killed in action. But now the collective West is starting to communicate quite clearly to us. And here's what The Economist had to say. Western help for Ukraine is likely to diminish next year. So we're talking about 2024. There is a weapons shortage and a munition shortage, and in some quarters, goodwill. So this is The Economist. This is a breaking story. The end keeps receding. There was a time when some Ukrainian officials, having halted Russia's army outside of Kiev, thought it would take only a few more months to bring the war to a conclusion. Most of the active combat actions will have finished by the end of this year, said Lieutenant General Kirill Budanov, head of military intelligence, in May 2022. By last November, shortly after a spectacular Ukrainian offensive in Kharkiv, Vladimir Harlov, a deputy defense minister at the time, was still expecting a swift victory. My feeling is that by the end of the spring, it will be all over. And that was the vaunted spring offensive. It was supposed to happen. It was supposed to build off of the supposed territorial gains in Kharkov, Kherson, etc., to bolster that summer offensive of supposed victory, and it fell flat on its face. So, in fact, Ukraine's counteroffensive did not even begin until June. Far from hastening the war's end, it has demonstrated just how long the fighting could drag on. Ukrainian forces, stymied by Russian minefields and other defensives, had inched forward on foot. The deployment of reserves and spiffy Western weapons has not yet yielded any big breakthroughs. Wet weather and a shortage of ammunition will probably bring the Ukrainian advance, such as it is, to a halt by late October, if not earlier. Another fighting season beckons. We must prepare ourselves for the long war in Ukraine, warned Jens Stoltenberg, NATO Secretary General, on September 17th. It'll take a considerable length of time to militarily eject all 200,000 plus Russian troops out of Russian-occupied Ukraine, said Mark Milley, America's top general, that same day. America insists it will stay for as long as it takes. As Joe Biden, the president, has said several times this year, Britain, France, Germany, and other allies have all used the same phrase. As ironclad as these pledges sound, they depend on two uncertain variables. One is the West's ability to furnish Ukraine's army with enough ammunition and weapons. The other is the political will to keep handing them over. So again, we are talking about the fact that not only is the collective West out of weapons and really out of the ability to produce enough weapons to push back Russia, but they're also out of the political conditions to make such a push even possible. So let's start with the first. Russian defense industry moved onto a war footing in the last quarter of 2022. And British officials say that Russia can now produce around 200 tanks per year, twice as many as they previously assumed. Mr. Connolly says that refurbished tanks included, so this is Richard Connolly, an expert in Russia's economy. He says the true figure is probably 500 to 800 per year. Western sanctions are not crimping output much, he adds, with crucial components such as semiconductors smuggled in via Hong Kong and Central Asia. So, this is just, again, shows the failure of the sanctions. Countries they say smuggled, but really a lot of these countries and regions, right, Hong Kong, part of China, Central Asia, a lot of these countries are close with Russia. They're not following the sanctions. In principle, Ukraine's friends should have no trouble helping it outgun Russia. The combined GDP, so this is what they always say, right? Look how big the NATO members are. They're 12 times that of Russia's GDP, even accounting for Russia's lower prices. The difference is that Russia is willing to spend much more heavily on war, now taking up 40% of the national budget so far as military spending, far in excess of Western levels. But this is also a misnomer. Here's The Economist trying to dupe you. Russia may be spending a larger portion of its GDP on war, but the combined military budget of the EU and the United States is in the close to $1 trillion. So, and that's just what we know publicly. So that's a misnomer. So another issue, two snags, right, about how to address the imbalance in investing in arms production is cost. So Estonia spends 5,000 to 6,000 on a new artillery shell on every new artillery shell, says a senior civil servant in the country's defense. That is Relatively cheap by NATO standards, he notes, but Russia, he says, spent 60,000 rubles or $620. The vast difference is largely down to cheaper labor and materials and lower costs and lower profit margins for arms manufacturers, most of which are state-owned. Inflation is exacerbating the problem. Prices for equipment and ammunition are shooting up, complained Admiral Rob Bauer, NATO bigwig, on September 16th. The second is timing. After a slow start, Russia has reached a race pace and they're in gear now. They're now going to start churning out stuff at the rate approximating what they need. American and European investments in new capacity, having started later, will not yield extra supplies until second half of 2024 to 2025, giving Russia more time to mobilize, build new defenses, and pin down Ukrainian forces. Let's look at artillery shells. The good news is that American and European production is soaring. Good news, right? Amazing. Actually, though, the output has risen from 168,000 shells in the spring to 336,000 today. It'll continue to rise. In European production, between them, America and Europe should comfortably produce nearly 2 million shells that next year. But the trouble is, it's barely enough to keep up. So they try to delay you from the reality here. Russia will produce 1 million to 2 million shells next year, according to British estimates. That is on top of a stock of around 5 million shells refurbished. Well, Ukraine has none. Right? Ukraine is out of shells, and they're only going to get maybe 2 million shells, maybe, and not even 2 million. The total the U.S. and Europe are going to produce. Total, they're not going to give it all to Ukraine, but they'll give them some. But Russia has already outpaced them 2 to 3 times right now. So that should allow the 5 million shells for Russia to fire 15,000 rounds a day. That is roughly on par with Ukraine's heightened consumption during its counteroffensive, according to people familiar with the data. But Ukraine can probably sustain that tempo for only a few more months, while Russia can sustain it for the rest of the year and onward. So they're going to talk about how there's borrowing being done, South Korea, and that the problems may ease, but there's also politics, right? So they say, oh, well, the year after next, if everything goes according to plan, then we'll have the shells, we'll have the weapons, etc. But politics. In Europe, the political winds seem favorable to Ukraine. A year from now, though, let's see. So in June and July, 64% of Europeans favor military aid to Ukraine. Strong support in not just in countries with a longstanding suspicion of Russia, such as Sweden, but also more distant member states like Portugal. But then you have hard right parties like Marine Le Pen in France and the AfD, where, you know, they could gain steam. Olaf Scholz has been mindful in Germany of anti-war sentiment, notably within his own party. He dithered for months before agreeing to send Leopards to Ukraine. He still refuses to send long-range Taurus missiles, even though Britain and France have given Ukraine comparable weapons. Mr. Scholz now has realized that public skepticism is mushy. As soon as he sends a new weapon, approval broadly follows. So here they're trying to say, well, he should do it anyway, but there's obviously concern. So Macron, right? Macron, who provoked crumbling in Kiev last year over his frequent phone calls with Vladimir Putin, his Russian counterpart, over the hesitation to send weapons, is now among the most gung-ho, and that a lot of French supposedly support this as well. But these are all polls that we don't know how good they really are. And so while they're saying that Europe is in really good shape to support more aid to Ukraine, the real big pusher for this is the United States. And I've said again and again, with the Republicans, with Kevin McCarthy, there's a lot of uncertainty there. So Ukraine aid is becoming a partisan issue, they say, and the prospects are less certain. If Trump wins, who knows what's going to happen? You never can predict what Donald Trump will do. And so there's a lot of interest to slow this conflict down in Washington. So, well, money makes some sense here, right? It's a money problem. It's going to be a debate, and now it's becoming more and more a debate as the United States, as the biggest supplier of aid to Ukraine, has political problems, political divisions over this issue. It's more than that, right? It's more than that. It is about whether this is something worthwhile in doing. America has been the fulcrum of the Allied effort to support Ukraine, chairing regular meetings at which donations of weapons are pledged and coordinated at Ramstein, an American military base in Germany. It has provided diplomatic cover for other countries' aid. For example, to Germany, to Schultz, who insisted that he would not allow German-made Leopard tanks to be sent to Ukraine unless Biden sent M1 Abrams first. And so in some cases, Europeans have sent arms to Ukraine and they understand that they will receive new American weapons to replace the donated ones. With these security guarantees underwritten by nuclear weapons have given Europeans the confidence to stand up to Russian threats. America has provided vital intelligence that has helped Ukraine find and destroy high-value targets. Substituting for this organization assistance would be a Herculean task, but may be unavoidable. The assumption of the West was, and I think everyone had been unspoken about this, was that to give them everything we can, and they will go on this one large offensive. Whatever happens in the end, we will settle for that. That was the plan. A new one is required, he says, involving not just more arms, but also more technology to offset Russia's advantages. Above all, change in mentality is needed. This is exactly what a war of attrition is about. Convince the West that we can outsuffer you, we can outfight you, we can outlast you. So that is the problem. The problem is the war of attrition. It is the fact that Russia has all of these advantages and that it's going to grind political will. And while the Economist, right, they say, when they say this, when Western mainstream media talks about it like this, you have to understand that the issue here is that even with more and more support going to Ukraine in terms of military weaponry, it's not enough. And that is having a huge impact on the political will of especially the United States, because a war of attrition is going to be incredibly difficult to sustain and could be subject to political headwinds. And that is why The Economist is sounding the alarm. The end of NATO's wonder weapons is coming soon. And so I want to show you what Scott Ritter had to say to Sputnik, all right, about the ATACMS and about this Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde approach that Biden has taken on Ukraine weapons, because it underscores this problem. And here's what Scott Ritter had to say.
The Biden administration seems to be going through a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde type phase when it comes to the nature of the weapons that it's willing to provide to Ukraine. A year ago, the Biden administration was very reticent about providing certain categories of weapons out of fear of creating the potential of an escalation between the United States, between NATO and Russia over Ukraine. The last thing the United States wanted, or so the Biden administration said, was a direct war with Russia. Today, all of those inhibitions seem to have been swept away. We see the United States providing M1 Abrams tanks. We see the United States authorizing the delivery of F-16 fighters. And now the United States is considering to provide Ukraine with the ATACMS long-range missile system, or the guided multiple launch rocket system, a 45-mile range rocket system delivered by the HIMARS system that has extreme accuracy and can deliver cluster munitions. This, of course, follows on the heels of the decision by the Biden administration made earlier this year to provide Ukraine with the cluster variant of the 155 millimeter artillery shell. Why is the Biden administration doing this? What's clear is that it's not doing this to assist the Ukrainians on the battlefield. The Ukrainians, according to Russian President Vladimir Putin, have suffered 71,000 casualties over the course of the last 4 months in a failed counteroffensive effort. And there's nothing about the nature of these weapons that would improve Ukraine's chances on the battlefield. These weapons that are being provided to provide Ukraine with the potential of doing harm to Russia. The ATACMS missile is being provided, simply put, to strike the Crimea bridge, to destroy that bridge, to enable Ukraine to strike targets deep in the Russian rear area, airfields, command posts, logistics. This is a dramatic escalation of the conflict. Now, why is the Biden administration doing this? Frankly speaking, it's out of an act of desperation. Look, anybody who looks at the situation on the ground in Ukraine knows that Ukraine is losing, Russia is winning, and literally there's nothing that can be done to prevent a Russian victory. The provision of ATACMS rockets, the GMLRS rocket system isn't going to change the outcome on the battlefield. What it will do is provide Ukraine the opportunity to inflict more harm on Russia. And the United States is betting that Russia will say, we don't want that to happen, that Russia is concerned about the domestic political consequences of Ukraine striking targets in the Russian River, Ukraine destroying the Crimea bridge. We'll see how this unfolds. My bet is that Russia, a nation that has a history of absorbing 27 million dead in the cause of defeating fascism, defeating Nazism, isn't going to yield to any threats being made by the United States, but we'll find out.
Yes, we will indeed find out. But, you know, and that couples with this, there's this contrast here, and it's Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. I mean, I think that's an apt, a really apt description here, because you have the economists on the one hand saying, we may have to slow down here because we're at a disadvantage. Russia has the artillery advantage. It has the weaponry advantage right now. And at the same time, all of Joe Biden's moves, all of the United States' moves, including what may happen out of this meeting, and it's almost a certainty that 24 billion more in military aid and other kinds of aid is going to go to Ukraine. It means that there is more, while there's more impetus to slow down, it's not slowing down right now, that it is a constant escalation. But that escalation is not the primary force here. It's not the primary factor, because every escalation now has an air of ineffectiveness. It is not successful. It's not going to breed the kind of success that the United States and, of course, its NATO vassals, its European vassals, are hoping it will bring. It's not going to bring that kind of success. And that is where there is this almost tearing apart and ripping apart of the fabric of the legitimacy of this conflict, of this proxy war altogether. Russia certainly has the advantages here. Now they're admitting it. Now the collectivists and the neocons are admitting these advantages, which have been a reality for quite some time, if they weren't a reality from the very beginning. The strategy was to throw everything that the United States, that NATO had at Ukraine, so that Ukraine would win, and that would be the end of it. Russia would fall, and I do believe, and I say this all the time, I believe that the calculation was that the economic war was going to undo Russia. It would undo it politically, and that would mean Russia would have to pull out. I don't think they ever thought Ukraine was going to plant its flag on the Donbass and say, we've thrown out Russia. Russia will no longer lay claim to this territory, which the majority of the citizens there and civilians there want Russia to be leading and presiding over. I don't think that was ever going to happen. And that's because I don't think the people of the Donbass, first of all, were ever going to stop fighting anyway. But they had hoped that Russia itself, the Russian Federation, the Russian military, would have to pull out because of issues, domestic issues, economic issues, political issues that would arise from this conflict. And it never happened, and it's not going to happen. So with all that said, the United States can't but escalate, while at the same time, the collective West as a whole, and the United States especially, I think the United States is really driving this force, not because it's a peacenik, not because it wants peace, but because it needs Europe to be the attack dog. It needs Europe to maintain almost like a Zelensky-like fervor about this conflict. But the United States is the one that wants to look like a rational actor. So it's going to be the one, as the hegemon, as the one who is dominating and domineering over Europe and Ukraine. It's going to be the one to advise and to counsel and say, we need to slow this down. It's a war of attrition now. And guess what? You're not going to get anything that you need for another year, 2 years. Who knows? Who knows? Because I think that the Economist article, along with what Scott Ritter had to say, perfectly provide that contrast of they're going to throw everything to you, everything that they've got to you. It's not going to make a difference. And at the same time, they're going to be telling Ukraine, that's the you, they're going to be telling Ukraine that it's time to slow down. It's a war of attrition. Please don't do anything rash or stupid. Don't get yourself eliminated before we can make the promises, or at least fulfill the promises that we've continued to make to you from the very beginning. So, you know, this is becoming a real problem. And here you have the desperation really setting in. And I think Scott Ritter was correct that these are all acts of desperation. Here you have on September 18th, the U.S. offered Pakistan IMF sweetener for Ukraine weapons. Washington was angered by Imran Khan's government for its aggressively neutral stance on Ukraine, The Intercept reported. So essentially, the United States brokered a loan from the International Monetary Fund to crisis-ridden Pakistan in exchange for a secret arms deal. The Intercept reported on September 18th, or on Sunday, and this was reported on September 18th. The outlet, citing sources with knowledge of the arrangement and government documents on both sides, claimed that the weapons were meant to supply the Ukrainian military in its ongoing conflict in Ukraine. So from the summer of 22 to the spring of 2023, there was supposed to be an arms deal between the U.S. and Pakistan. And the exchange was facilitated by Global Military Products, a subsidiary of Global Ordnance, a company seemingly connected to Ukraine. The leaked documents show that American and Pakistani contracts, licensing, and requisition documents related to U.S. broker deals to buy Pakistani military weapons for Ukraine, according to The Intercept. So, again, I mean, this is similar to what happened when it was revealed by the New York Times that South Korea was supposed to send its stored ammunition, Israel as well, to Ukraine. This is how desperate the situation is. And they're going to continue to do things like this. They're going to continue to twist anybody they can who the United States and the West has given weapons to, NATO has given weapons to, give it to Ukraine while we work on slowing things down. But the situation is really bad. And the Economist could only skim the surface because they don't want to tell you the truth. The mainstream media doesn't want to tell you the truth. And here's the cold hard truth. This is from Business Insider. By no means a friend of Russia or a friend of peace. This is from Business Insider. They're saying that Ukraine is firing 7,000 rounds a day, a fraction of the 60,000 shells Russia was firing earlier this year. Ukraine lags far behind Russia in its use of artillery shells, according to CNN. Russia fired 60,000 shells a day earlier this year, 2023, while Ukraine fires now just 7,000. Artillery fire has been a hallmark of Russia's 18-month war in Ukraine. They're burning through artillery shells. Ukraine is ammunition at a rate of 7,000 rounds per day, still a much lower rate that Russia was using during the height of its military efforts earlier in the year. Ukraine is firing 6,000 to 7,000 rounds a day compared to Russia's rate of 20 to 60,000 at the peaks of its barrages this year. And that continues. It's not always that high, but it is still much higher than what Ukraine is doing. It wants to fire more than 10,000 rounds a day, according to CNN, which would remain far below Russia's military efforts. But to reach that level, Kiev would need about 1.5 million artillery shells a year, which, as The Economist reported, that's not possible because it's going to take at least a year for the United States and Europe to produce 2 million. So that means Ukraine is effed. They're screwed. They don't have what they need. This constant exchange of fire is depleting Ukraine's stockpile and worrying its allies about its own arsenals. As of July, the U.S. had committed sending more than 2 million artillery rounds to Ukraine, while the EU has approved plans to send 250,000 rounds. But again, a lot of this means these commitments and these pledges does not mean that they are available. It means that they will be produced and sent. And as The Economist said, as of now, that's not going to happen for another year. Does Ukraine have that amount of time? Probably not. So what the United States, what the collective West, the neocon foreign policy establishment, the imperialists, what they want to do is they want to keep this going as long as possible while making a shift in the public perception, the public image, the public relations of this conflict in order to open up the option for some kind of frozen conflict. And when I say frozen, I don't necessarily mean ceasefire. But what I mean is that this conflict could be frozen in place and that there may be fighting on the front lines. It may actually wind down because of the weather. And that will be the opportunity. When the weather in Ukraine turns poor, it'll be an opportunity to then shift the narrative because there'll be less fighting, less killing. And that narrative can be shifted to, well, Ukraine has done the best it could. Ukraine has won. It has won a battle of morale. It has taken on the Russian giant. It made gains in the past. And you've seen the reports on Zaporozhye and constantly talk about Ukraine having made some kind of gains recently, but there's no confirmation of such gains. That will continue for some time. And then the United States and the collective West can say, well, it's good that it's slowed down now. The terrain is not there. We need to regroup. We need to produce more weapons. It's not the time now to just win this war altogether. We need to freeze the conflict. The weather is not good. And we will essentially declare Ukraine victorious and that our efforts were noble. And let's see how long it takes to restore Ukraine to fighting force. It could take more than a year. And if it takes more than a year, then you never know if the conflict will continue on in the same way again. That is where this conflict has seemingly been going for quite some time. We know that Vladimir Putin, Russia, they are not in a hurry to settle this conflict. They're not interested in a negotiated settlement at this moment for very good reasons. For one, Ukraine and its NATO backers, its U.S. masters, have not shown that they have any interest in meeting any of Russia's security guarantees, its concerns. None of that is on the table. There is conversations between between Russian and United States intelligence, CIA and SVR, but we don't know the extent of what that means and whether that will lead to direct talks between Ukraine and Russia. Antony Blinken, after his visit to Kiev, September 6th, he went on ABC, and what did he say? Ukraine's ready to talk, which I think was really code for we need to begin to talk. And Russia, of course, will be the one who needs to come to the table as a good faith actor, because they can't let go of the narrative. They can't admit that they've lost. But the reality is that the neocons, the imperialists, the military contractors are winning, but the overall strategy of the collective West has been a failure. Ukraine was not the proxy they thought it would be. It was not the guarantor of victory over Russia they thought it was going to be. And so they overplayed their hand, and now they are paying the price. And we are going to see more and more admissions. We're going to see the wonder weapons for Ukraine dry up for the simple fact that they just aren't there. We're going to see the United States and NATO and the collective West play a game of chicken where, on the one hand, they talk a language of force and escalation and send aid package after aid package, while those aid packages get smaller and while the weapons get fewer. And that's already been happening. And if you watch Brian Berletic and others, you know that that's been happening. But on the other side, the political side, which is of even more importance and of interest to this program, on the political side, I think we're going to see a quieter narrative, a narrative that says Ukraine, they did a good job. Now is not the time to fight any further. The weather is poor. Ukraine struck a lot of victories. It's especially the moral victory. All of the aid was justified. Now we just wait and see to when we can get back to the business of waging war on Russia. That will be, I believe, how the United States and its collective West vassals explain away their defeat. But defeat it is. And Russia will continue to pursue its objectives. And that will place a lot of pressure on the collective West to decide and make a real decision. Can it sustain the level of support? Can it maintain a war of attrition? The facts say no, but you know the collective West is going to try, and you know that Russia is not going to back down, not because it wants war, not because it thinks war is grand, or as Zelensky said, it wages a war every other decade or every decade, whatever he said at the UN General Assembly. All of that is nonsense, and it obscures the reality of what the United States and its vassals have done around the world. But the truth is that Russia wants to win, and Russia will win, because Russia has a huge stake in what happens in this region. It is right on in Russia's backyard, and now many of these territories are part of the Russian Federation because their civilians wanted it, their residents wanted it, the people there wanted it, the ethnic Russians wanted it, the Russian speakers wanted it, and many others wanted it. And they wanted it because the reality always was that Ukraine was a terrorist proxy regime born by a coup that empowered the most malignant, diseased forces on the planet, neo-Nazis, real, just genuine, old-time Nazis, and all of their backers and supporters. And there's nothing more repugnant than that. There's nothing more cruel and dictatorial and oppressive than living under a regime that is constantly attacking you for being Russian or even aligned with Russia. That is why the reality has shaped out the way it has. And this is ultimately why Russia will not back down. And so it'll really be on Russia's terms, but it's really going to be up to the collective West to settle on Russia's terms. And that is just an existential problem. It is an absolute NO. And that's why we are where we are. That's why we're in a quagmire. And that's why Ukraine is going to continue to diminish in terms of its prospects. And that's why this war is effectively lost. Not on the Russian side, but on the United States, NATO's, and of course, its Ukrainian puppet. All right, everybody. That's the second story. We got one more on deck. All right. Thank you so much for tuning in. And yeah, it's been a great stream. We got 2,500 viewers about. Keep liking the stream. We got 1,200, 1,300 or so likes. Keep hitting that like button, and we can continue on to this last story. I have a lot of announcements at the end, so you'll want to stick around until the end. All right? Because there's a lot of interest. You'll want to hear what I have to say at the end in terms of the future of this program, what's up, what's coming around the bend, and whatnot. Just give me a second to pull up the next story. All right. Got a lot of trolls in the chat. I love trolls. I mean, when they say stupid things, I mean, you know, of course, moderators feel free to, if they're saying things that are just unproductive, do what you will. But, you know, trolls are just helping me, honestly. It's no water off my back. In any event, if you don't have trolls, if you don't have haters, if you don't have people who can't stand what you're saying, can't stand the truth, then you're not really doing it right. That's how I see it. Oh, also, first, before I get started, I can't believe I forgot. Hello, Rockfin family, Rumble family too. Everyone follow me on Rumble at Dhaiphong, rumble.com. Go to Dhaiphong there. I don't know if I was able to get that in the video description just yet, but I'll send it to you in the chat at the end. Follow me on Rumble, Dhaiphong. I am on Rumble. Hello, Rumble community. I am very glad to be on that platform now as not only extra security, but also just to expand the audience and to, support independent media. Also, hello, Rockfin family. Thank you so much for tuning in again. So, you can find me at rockfin.com. Search my name, Dhaiphong. All right, everybody. Last but not least, we got a good one for this one, all right? So, and bear with me because this one, it's a flurry, and it's always a flurry with China, all right? Because we're going to get into China now. So, China is on a flurry of diplomatic missions to ostensibly strengthen, promote, and grow the multipolar world. And in the latest flurry of developments, it all came within the context of the UN General Assembly, the 78th. And that occurred on the week of September 18th. And during this period, China, which didn't send Xi Jinping to the UN General Assembly in New York City, instead, China was conducting just a master class in what it means to strengthen not just the global South's hands, but the multipolar world as a whole's hands in this rapidly shifting geopolitical atmosphere. China has been doing this for quite some time now. And of course, given China's economic prominence, its stature, and its influence in all realms, it makes a lot of sense. But this felt different. And what I mean by that is there was something very strategic and something very politically charged and I'm not saying that in a critical way. I'm saying that in an objective sense. There was a huge political meaning behind why China was conducting the diplomatic masterclass that it was at this very moment. So we can just go down the line, all right? First off, China was not happy. And here's the Global Times. China was not happy with how the United States treated the UN General Assembly. And Global Times wrote that the U.S. hijacked the UN General Assembly using the Ukraine crisis to serve its selfish purpose and attack others. So Joe Biden once again turned the United Nations General Assembly into a runaway for touting U.S. quote-unquote leadership. He has made the Ukraine crisis the spotlight of the gathering to shore up the alliance of U.S.-centered small cliques and use the crisis as a weapon to attack other countries at the meeting, whilst also covering up his cliche, hollow proposals for the Global South's development, which is the main focus of the UN General Assembly this year. Biden's move diverted focus once again from Global South countries. Move of diverting focus of the UN General Assembly has again assured Global South countries of Washington's lack of interest in helping developing nations. Apart from the usual snarling at Russia, Biden made what seemed like soft tone remarks on China-U.S. relations, saying that they need to be quote-unquote responsibly managed competition between Beijing and Washington, quote, so it does not tip into conflict, end quote. But in the eyes of Chinese experts, the U.S. president's words only show the White House now has few arrows in its quiver for handling the world's most important bilateral relationship. They believe that although bilateral ties still have a window of opportunity, the U.S.'s usual actions don't match words. Practice makes it harder to predict if Washington will take any moves to improve ties. And the reason why I begin with this story is because it is backed up, this position that China has taken. This is a very consistent position. One, on rejecting the use of Ukraine and the proxy war there as an excuse to strengthen the U.S.'s hands at the expense of the rest of the world. That's what the United States has been doing, not just to Europe, but doing the entire global South. We also see now with this Ukraine grain deal, Poland, Hungary, etc. These countries, even they are getting fed up. Poland are getting fed up with it, and that's because the United States has attempted to use the Ukraine proxy war to essentially bury everyone else. And so China has said not only this, but that the United States, when it comes to China, is not sincere. It is essentially all talk and no action. And this is coming on the heels now of Wang Yi's meeting. At the same time that the UN General Assembly was about to kick off, there was a surprise meeting, okay, in Malta, right before the UN General Assembly between Wang Yi and Jake Sullivan, where they held multiple rounds of meetings over the course of 2 days. And so the top diplomat, Wang Yi, is also a member of the political bureau, the Politburo of the Communist Party of China, and now the director. So this is the highest position in China, the Office of Foreign Affairs Commission of the CPC Central Committee. He urged the U.S. to abide by the 3 joint communiques and honor its commitment to support Taiwan. And then Washington said the 2 meetings were candid, substantive, constructive as part of an effort to maintain open lines of communication. But as this was being touted by Washington as an important meeting, and this was one of many diplomatic meetings that have occurred over the last several months. You had Gina Raimondo, Commerce Secretary, Janet Yellen, Secretary of Treasury, John Kerry, Antony Blinken. They've all gone to China. And what has happened every time they've gone to China? Well, even Gina Raimondo, the Commerce Secretary, said things are going great. We're really working together better now. And then she goes on and says, I was upset that China released the Huawei Mate 60 Pro with probably US technology. And now there needs to be a probe when it's obvious. And people have already shown this, that China made that phone through the Huawei Corporation, 100% China made parts, including advanced semiconductors, which is really why they're scared. So after diplomatic meeting after diplomatic meeting, it's quite obvious that China is fed up. China's fed up with Joe Biden, fed up with the United States, fed up with the neocons, fed up with this fake diplomacy, and is ready to make a huge statement. It has been doing so diplomatically for quite some time. But this week, on the lead up to the UN General Assembly and even into it, it has been a flurry, and I'm going to show you why. So, first, there was the meeting in mid-September between Nicolas Maduro and China Xi Jinping. So now, mind you, Nicolas Maduro is not even recognized as the president of Venezuela by the United States, despite being elected by the Venezuelan government, the electorate. He's not recognized. They recognize a coup government, a coup leader, really not even a government, just a coup leader, Juan Guaido. But China decided, let's meet with Venezuela despite the crippling sanctions on it, and let's create an all-weather partnership. That is what was agreed to. The cooperation has been upgraded during this visit. And mind you, this visit was 6 days long. How much time did Xi Jinping, or did Wang Yi, how much time did Wang Yi give Jake Sullivan in Malta? 2 days. And mind you, that was a flurry of meetings, probably over the course of the totals of a single day. 6 days Nicolas Maduro was visiting China. That is the big difference. So the cooperation through many agreements, multiple agreements, has been upgraded to an all-weather strategic partnership reflecting the continued dedication of both countries to the advancement and development of the other. The decision by China and Venezuela to strengthen their ties comes as the world is witnessing a transformation in international alliances and trade partnerships. The collaboration between the two countries is one of the most significant aspects of this new era of partnership. The recent agreements are expected to further cement Venezuela's ties with China, which has long been the country's major leading trading partner. Investments in infrastructure development, oil and gas exploration, and production are part of the cooperation in the energy industry. During his visit to China, Maduro expressed his optimism for relations in the future, stating that it heralds the start of a new era for both nations. Venezuela, which has repeatedly experienced economic difficulty, views China as a dependable ally that can aid in reviving its economy. China, on the other hand, sees Venezuela as a crucial friend in the region and a valued supply of natural resources. So we can go on and on and on. But furthermore, the strengthened relationship extends beyond economic interests and includes strategic considerations. Both countries have reaffirmed their commitment to mutual support in international forums and no interference in the internal affairs of each. The collaboration between China and Venezuela should be seen in the larger context of the Belt and Road Initiative, so which seeks to increase integration, infrastructure development, etc. But in the political sense, which is what I'm focusing on here, Nicolas Maduro is an interesting choice for a 6-day visit in the lead up to the UN General Assembly, when everyone is expecting every time there is a major global gathering like the G20. What is expected by the neocons is that China will come and they will meet candidly and spend all their time hobnobbing with the United States to make the United States look good. And indeed, Wang Yi met with Jake Sullivan, but for a couple of days. Nicolas Maduro, he got 6. But that's not all. During the beginnings of the UN General Assembly, the week of the 18th, where did Wang Yi go next after Malta, after those surprise meetings? He went to visit with Vladimir Putin and Sergei Lavrov in Moscow. So here they are meeting together. And here is the report from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the People's Republic of China. So right after me with Jake Sullivan for 2 days, Wang Yi spent 4 days in Moscow in Russia meeting with Sergei Lavrov and Vladimir Putin. So Wang Yi, the member of the Politburo and foreign minister of China, met with Russian foreign minister Sergei Lavrov in Moscow. He said, under the strategic guidance of the two heads of state, China-Russia relations have maintained a momentum of sound, steady development with continuously deepening practical cooperation, rich and colorful people-to-people and cultural interactions, and fast-growing personnel exchanges. A China-Russia relationship featuring enduring good neighborliness and friendship, comprehensive strategic coordination, as well as mutually beneficial cooperation and win-win results will continue to contribute to the two countries' respective development and revitalization and bring significant benefits to the two people. They said both China and Russia pursue an independent foreign policy, and bilateral cooperation doesn't target any third party, is not subject to disruption by any third party, and is not swayed by any third party. As major countries in the world and permanent members of the UN Security Council, China and Russia bear important responsibilities. China and Russia follow the trend of the times, demonstrate responsibilities of major countries, fulfill international obligations, uphold multilateralism, promote multipolar world, etc., etc. So Sergei Lavrov shared his view of the Ukraine crisis and applauded China's position paper for accommodating the security guarantees of all parties and being conducive to eliminating the root causes of the conflict. The Russian side will continue to be open to negotiations and dialogue. Wang Yi said that China is committed to the right direction in the conflict with peace talks and will play a constructive role in terms of a settlement. And then he talked about the Belt and Road Initiative, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, BRICS membership, etc., integrating those two. But the point here is, again, do you see the difference? When Wang Yi met with Jake Sullivan, it was about get it together on the Taiwan question. You need to stop meddling in Taiwan. We need to steer relations on the right course, period. With Russia, it's about good neighborliness, expanding the realm of trade and diplomacy, taking on responsibilities together in unity. You see the difference here. And you see this kind of statement that this makes, that Wang Yi, the top diplomat of China, is making the rounds first to meet with Jake Sullivan and then spending double the time, triple the time with the likes of Maduro and Sergei Lavrov. And of course, Vladimir Putin, which I will pull up now. So Wang Yi then met with Vladimir Putin after meeting with Sergei Lavrov. And this is what Global Times had to say about it. And there they are shaking hands. Russian President Vladimir Putin met with Wang Yi, a member of the Political Bureau of the Communist Party of China, director of the Office of Foreign Affairs Commission in Moscow, according to China's foreign ministry. This happened on Wednesday, the 20th of September. Then Chinese President Xi Jinping met with his Russian counterpart. Chinese President Xi Jinping met with his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin in the Kremlin in Moscow of March of this year. Since then, important consensus has been reached by both countries and has been implemented one by one, with positive results having been achieved in various sectors, including trade, culture, sports exchanges, and cooperation, said Putin. Since the beginning of this year, Russia has overcome the impact of unilateral sanctions imposed by the West and the U.S., and its economy has begun to recover and grow, with various functions operating normally, according to Putin. He said that Russia looks forward to strengthening, planning, and deepening practical cooperation with China. Russia highly appreciates and supports the joint construction of the Belt and Road Initiative, opposes distortion and smearing of the BRI, and Russia is willing to strengthen the connectivity between the Eurasian Economic Union and the BRI, promoting regional integration. Again, that's really key to be at the forefront of this meeting, because it's oftentimes the collective West, especially the United States, tries to say the Eurasian Economic Union, BRI, are in competition with one another. Putin, Xi, Chinese officials, Russian officials always dispute this claim. He said that Russia is ready to maintain close coordination with China in multilateral frameworks such as the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the BRICS, resisting unilateral hegemony and bloc confrontation, upholding international fairness and justice. Wang Yi said that during his visit to Russia, he had comprehensive discussions with Nikolai Patrushev, Secretary of the Security Council of the Russian Federation, and Sergei Lavrov, Russian Foreign Minister, reviewing cooperation between the two countries in various fields. China is willing to work together with Russia based on the important consensus reached by the two heads of state to enhance strategic mutual trust, deepen cooperation, and further consolidate the public and social foundation of Russia-China partnership. In the face of a complex international situation, the global multipolarization process is accelerating, and unilateral actions are not sustainable, and hegemonism is unpopular. As permanent members of the Security Council, China and Russia bear important responsibilities in development. Both countries should strengthen their multilateral strategic cooperation, safeguard legitimate rights and interests, making new efforts to promote an international order more fair and reasonable. So they exchange it on the Ukraine crisis, etc. But the point again is the results of these talks are that Russia and China's friendship is ironclad. They're going to surpass that $200 billion by the end of this year mark in total trade volume. They're going to continue to work together, most importantly, on these issues of strategic concern, from global infrastructure development and integration to diplomacy. And the most important thing is that these two countries are united, and they're uniting quite clearly and evidently as the United States is trying to position itself as some kind of arbiter of diplomacy with China, while it is attempting to undermine Russia through the Ukraine proxy war at the UN General Assembly. So while the US is playing its dirty games, its dirty war games, China is showing that it does not have any interest in them. And not only does it have an interest in them, but it is going to lead something completely different. It is not going to succumb to any kind of pressure, whatever pressure Jake Sullivan and neocon hacks like that can try to apply to China. But nonetheless, this is the big one. So not only was China meeting with Nicolas Maduro, Sergei Lavrov, not only was Wang Yi meeting with Xi Jinping met with Nicolas Maduro, Wang Yi met with Sergei Lavrov and Vladimir Putin, but you also now have Syria's president Bashar al-Assad making his first visit to China in 12 years to boost cooperation. And this is huge. There's been a conflict in Syria, a proxy war led by the United States, occurring since 2011. And that has created a disaster in Syria, now mainly economic, as Syria was able to successfully, with Russian help, beat back the war on the military front. But still, a third of Syria is occupied, and still Bashar al-Assad is condemned globally by the neocon hawks that lead the collective West. And the sanctions regime on Syria is devastating. Devastating. Syria has never been more impoverished because of it. And now you have China during the UN General Assembly, as Zelensky is meeting with Biden in Washington, as the United States is scrambling to clean up its Ukraine mess, as it is trying to paint itself in the lead up to the 2024 elections as some kind of arbiter of democracy. Here you have China saying, we do not care about your sanctions regime. We don't care about your proxy wars. We are going to go around the world, the gambit of the multipolar world, of the global south, and show you that we stand on the right side of history as in truth, the new leader of the world, the new superpower. That's what China is. It's a different kind of superpower. It is not domineering. It doesn't dominate. It's not a hegemon, but it is a superpower. It is an economic giant. It is a diplomatic giant. It's a political giant. It has prestige. It has success. It has all kinds of achievements that it can tout and it can show the world, and it has. And that's why the world has embraced its diplomacy. And here, Syria is no different, but this is in fact huge. So Syrian President Bashar al-Assad travels to China. So he arrived, I believe he arrived September 21st, where he is expected to engage in a bilateral summit as well as other high-level meetings. It is the first time a Syrian president has visited China since the start of the Syrian crisis more than 12 years ago. Given China's positive role mediating a deal in March between Saudi Arabia and Iran, so that's one of the huge diplomatic achievements of China, brokering peace, which in turn led to Saudi Arabia easing and brokering a kind of peace on the Yemen conflict. But China brought together Saudi Arabia and Iran to settle their differences and to cooperate. So given Iran's positive role in mediating a deal between the two, Chinese experts believe that Assad's visit will extend the Middle East recognition towards China's concept of regional peaceful development. Practical cooperation on China's engagement in Syria's reconstruction is expected to be discussed. Reuters, citing a statement from the presidency in Damascus, reported on Tuesday that Assad, accompanied by Syrian First Lady Asma al-Assad and a senior delegation, will travel to China. So they arrived in China on Thursday for a string of meetings in Beijing and Changzhou, East China's Jiangsu province. A Syria-China summit will also be held. As to confirm Assad's reported visit to China at Wednesday's routine press conference, Mao Ning, a spokesperson for the Foreign Ministry of China, said that there will be an update in due course, but it's happened. He is there. Assad's visit will be perceived as a sign that China-Syria relations could be restored once again to the level prior to the Arab Spring, when the two sides were engaged in a broad range of cooperation and shared a steady friendship between peoples of the two countries. It is expected that Assad will touch on practical cooperation when meeting with Chinese leaders, including the resumption of previous projects such as the construction of reservoirs, oil fields, and the other infrastructure projects, as well as discussing potential areas of new cooperation. It comes at a time when Syria is seeking a new balanced and comprehensive diplomacy in a new historical period, and China is very undoubtedly an important part of this. Syria pins great hope on China to engage in the reconstruction of Syria and facilitate communication with Turkey, Iran, and Russia as an independent, neutral, major country, so as to gradually restore Assad's central government control of the country. Assad's visit to China is an extension of the diplomatic concept, as they said, and about regional and peaceful development, in sharp contrast to the United States, which has an image of a provoker in the Middle East, shirking the responsibility it should have taken. While China consistently hears of solving conflicts through diplomatic dialogue and opposing interference in Syria's affairs. And I think what's the biggest, and most important part of this visit is that the United States is still at war with Syria. It is still waging a proxy war. There's still an occupation that the United States upholds in Syria. It is occupying 30% of its territory. That's water. That's oil. It is stealing Syria's oil, sending it out of Syria through Turkey, Iraq, and other places. Syria is in really bad shape. Syria needs help with reconstruction. They've been talking about reconstruction for years and years. But because of the continuation of the proxy war, at some levels militarily, but really because of the sanctions, Syria has not been able to rebuild. And China is willing to step in and serve that purpose. Russia has been mediating talks as well diplomatically with Turkey and Syria, but China is going to play a significant role. And this is really a message. Again, while China doesn't target any third countries and will never have that position, this is the timing, right? This is important. And of course, all of this was planned in advance, knowing that there was going to be major attempts by the United States to undermine China and Russia, to paint both of these countries as shirking their responsibilities. Remember the G20? Xi Jinping wasn't there. And what did Biden say? Oh, I'm disappointed. The whole collective West media said China does not care about its international responsibilities. Well, China's showing you what it cares about, what kind of international responsibilities it is upholding. And it is upholding the self-determination of all nations. It is upholding the fact that nations like Syria, Venezuela, Russia, that these countries deserve not just to have a seat at the table, but to be respected, and their sovereignty to be respected. And that these countries form not just some kind of neutral principle of neutrality by China, and some kind of adherence to the UN Charter, but it also is a message that China maintains its global and ideological and political position as one that stands with the global South against the hegemonism, the imperialism, the interference, the neocolonialism of the collective West. That China is not repeating that process, as the media often likes to attempt to smear China around. China's not doing that. China's not repeating the process. What China is doing is saying, actually, we're for something different. And we are going to show you at a moment where all eyes are supposed to be on the UN General Assembly and Washington's Zelensky visit and all of this. It's all supposed to be on the West and the United States. We're supposed to be looking at how they're trying to clean up their mess. And we're going to show you how to really clean up messes. And what China is saying is, we're here to clean up the mess left by the United States, left by the collective West, that's still being waged by the collective West. These wars, these unilateral interventions, these sanctions, that China is there to be an alternative, a bulwark against them. Not because they're targeting the United States and the collective West, but because the very existential survival of humanity and of the development itself for these countries hinges upon charting an alternative. And China is doing just that. That is why you have Maduro in Venezuela, one of the most heavily sanctioned countries in the world, on the top of China's diplomatic agenda during this time. That's why Syria is getting a hero's welcome, Bashar al-Assad, a hero's welcome, as one of the most sanctioned and war-targeted countries in the world by the collective West. That is why Russia, despite all the attempts to peel China from Russia and to blame China for what Russia's doing in Ukraine and for attempting to smear and sabotage both countries, China says, no, we're going to continue to strengthen this partnership as you try to gain some kind of moral, political high ground over us during this very sensitive time, this supposed diplomatic whirlwind that the collective West is thumping its chest about when it comes to the United Nations General Assembly and all of the events surrounding it. So while the Biden administration claims that it's for making alliances and strengthening the global architecture and by working together, basically what the United States says is do what we say. That's how we work together. Join AUKUS, join the Quad, join NATO, do what we say. Sanction Russia, destroy your own economies, be dominated by our corporations and our military bases and what have you. Do what we say. Saudi Arabia, pump that oil for us. Lower prices for us. Supply armed groups for us. Do what we say. Turkey, the same way. All these countries that are now having a kind of come to Allah moment or a real awakening, so to speak. All these countries that are having awakening, joining BRICS, joining the multipolar world, when maybe once they were firmly in the grips of the United States' imperial agenda. It's all because, or at least in major part, because China and in large part Russia too have chartered a different kind of way of doing things, and one that is effective, and one that doesn't come with endless war, with sanctions, with chaos, political chaos, internal chaos. It doesn't come with that. It doesn't come with interference. It doesn't come with, if you don't do what we say, then we're going to change your government. What happened to Viktor Yanukovych in Ukraine? What happened to him? The day after he agreed to balance relations with Russia and the European Union, he was gone. Maidan 2.0, fascists were empowered, and he was overthrown with billions of U.S. support backing that effort over the course of years. That is what the United States does. That is the example it has set. Now the rest of the world is looking at this as a huge mistake. And China is looking like a very good alternative. So good that it won't be long until all countries except for maybe the collective West, join the Belt and Road Initiative. I know Italy, with that fraud Meloni, everyone thought Giorgia Meloni was some kind of, I don't understand why anyone thought she was going to be anything but a puppet of the collective West. But nonetheless, regardless of whatever happened to Italy's participation in the Belt and Road Initiative, they're going to have a forum with Putin in attendance next month in October. And representatives of 110 countries have already confirmed, and there's not even a date yet. There are representatives. There's not even a date. And how do I know this? I know this because I've been trying to schedule a live stream actually with experts about the Belt and Road Initiative around the time the summit is about to begin, but I can't really do that until the date is set. But you already have 110 political and diplomatic representatives, experts, etc., who have committed to participating in the forum, according to Mao Ning, the spokesperson of China's foreign ministry. Sorry. And that's a vast majority of the 152 countries that are now involved in China's flagship infrastructure and integration development initiative. So the writing's on the wall. China has demonstrated over and over and over again that it is committed to a multipolar world and committed to leading an alternative. And it has chosen a very opportune time to send a message that regardless of what the United States does, regardless of how it behaves, regardless of how it frames whatever it is doing around Ukraine, Taiwan, China, around the Taiwan Straits, around any kind of bilateral issue with China, anywhere around the world, regardless of what it's doing, sanctions on Venezuela, sanctions on Syria, it doesn't matter. China's going to chart that alternative, and countries will decide accordingly. And much of the world is choosing China. All right, everybody, that's it for the stories. We've gone whirlwind at 2 hours. And I'm just going to get to announcements, and I'm going to get out of here by 11, all right? So first, before I get to that, all right, we still got 2,200 viewers. And I want to tell all of you, and of course, Rockfin community, Rumble community can hear this too. First up, mid-October, I am heading to Vietnam. I am going to speak to people about these issues in Vietnam, just like I did in China. I'll do some walkthroughs. Vietnam is a very unique country. It's my first time there. I'm going with Veterans for Peace on a delegation. It's going to be great. It's going to be 2.5 weeks. I'm going to be in Hanoi, Da Nang. We'll be in Ho Chi Minh City. So we'll be everywhere. But that trip is costly, and it also includes a donation to Vets for Peace, which I'm very much willing to give. But with that said, this on top of the growing costs of doing this work does require financial support. So I really would appreciate it if you are able to please become a member on Patreon. On patreon.com/DannyHaiphong, you get early notifications, you get audio, you get first access and dibs to all of my work. You get to suggest guests, suggest content, questions to guests. For every guest that comes on, you can submit questions and I ask them. These are just some of the perks that you get. You get a free PDF of my 2019 book, which is right there, I believe, right there. American Exceptionalism and American Innocence, A People's History of Fake News from the Revolutionary War to the War on Terror. You get a free PDF copy of that and much more. So become a Patreon member. There's annual options. And that's the best way to support. In other ways, of course, Substack. There's YouTube membership, and welcome to all YouTube, Substack, and Patreon members for joining this program today. There's also one-time options. Buy Me a Coffee is a great option. PayPal is an okay option. I think Buy Me a Coffee is a little bit better. And but PayPal is also an option if you prefer. And of course, there's others in the video description too. Not to mention, I always plug my Telegram, t.me/DannyHaiphong. China and Geopolitics is the channel name. You can find that link in the video description as well as my link tree, which has many of these resources embedded in it. So that's first. That's first for just getting those plugs out. Now I'm going to tell you some more announcements. So Tuesday is likely going to be the next time I stream. And on Tuesday, I am going to be joined by Scott Ritter. We are going to go over Ukraine. We're going to talk about the latest developments there. Scott Ritter will join this program live, and it should be a fun one. I am also working on many other guests I just haven't confirmed just yet. I'm hoping to do some roundtables before I go to Vietnam. So be on the lookout for all of that. And the best way you can do that, of course, is being subscribed here, hitting that notifications bell. And you get notifications. Of course, becoming a member, you get guaranteed notifications as a paid member because YouTube is not reliable. And I am quite communicative there. And of course, with boundaries, I do also interact with my viewers and with my supporters. So with all that said, I have many things planned, but Scott Ritter on the 26th. And then there will be a flurry of streams. I'm trying to get Richard Medhurst on the program before I leave. I'm trying to do a Belt and Road Initiative forum preview before I leave. There's a lot I'm trying to do, a couple of roundtables. I don't know if it'll all get done, but a lot will get done in that period. And so just be on the lookout as I start to confirm things. With all that said, though, there's more. All right. More announcements. And I'm trying to... Oh, Rockfin. So let me send you my channel on Rockfin in the chat. Please do. Here we go. I have some good suggestions. I'll go in the chat soon. Yes, so this is what I do actually, Nazmul. Maybe you can offer a stake and program to your members, like participate in your content ideation process, etc. Yes, that's what I offer. That's one of the biggest things that I offer. Thank you, Nazmul, for that comment. Rumble is in the chat now. Please go to that link. Please hit follow that channel as the alternative. All my YouTube videos are going to go up there. So if anything, I'm going to plug this on every stream. If anything happens to my YouTube channel, God forbid you have me on Rumble. All right. And Rockfin is also an option. Just look up my name, Danny Dhaiphong. So that is, of course, stake in the programming. Yes. Suggesting guests, asking questions of guests, suggesting content. You can do all of that on my Patreon. That's the best place. But of course, it can happen on Substack and on YouTube. Just those platforms don't allow for the same kind of interaction as Patreon does. But it is doable nonetheless in community posts, etc. And of course, in all the posts I do on Substack, there's comment sections for paid members, and I offer it all for your support. That's just one thing. Now, with that said, there's a few other things I wanted to announce. I can't really remember. Tomorrow I am going to be. That's why I got to leave by 11 because I can't be on here till midnight plus. But I'm going to be on Due Dissidence tomorrow, so I'm not sure if you're aware of this channel. They're one of my favorites on domestic developments. They're pretty good on foreign policy too. I am going to be on that program co-hosting. I was invited. Thought I would assist their program. I've been following them. So do subscribe there. I'm going to be joining, talking about whatever developments. They're going to ask me. He's going to ask me questions. The host of Due Dissidence will be asking me questions on domestic politics, RFK Jr., all kinds of things. You'll get my opinions on those things because I do have nuanced opinions on, I think, everything, but I don't often get into a lot of things here in order to keep this channel laser focused on global and geopolitics. So do join there. I gave you the channel. Let me give you the link actually of that show. Did I already put it in the chat? So you can wait if you're up at 9 a.m. Eastern. I don't know how I'll be up, but I will be up somehow. All right. And it'll be fun. It'll be fun for a good little morning chat on a Friday. So I put that in the chat. All right. Make sure you hold your place, set your notification, all that good stuff. Don't embarrass us as Desert Mantis. I would never. I will be, for your moderation, I gotta really uphold principles here, and I will be. All right. So I'm gonna do a shout out of the super chats right now. All right. So Horatio Spinelli, thank you so much. Cobb fan says, as always, Danny continues to do such a great job. I really appreciate your kind comment. We have Shea Basamusid. Sorry for butchering your name, but appreciate your super sticker. And Horatio, thanks so much for the double trouble, for the double support. All right. So believe that's all for the announcements. Still got a couple minutes if you have any additional super chats you want to send my way or anything else you want to comment on. Somebody asked me I was on Russell Brand. I didn't see that in the chat. It's kind of went away. Somebody said I was on Russell Brand. What do I think of what happened to him? Well, I was never on Russell Brand's show. Never got that invite, which is fine. I'm not here. I'm no longer. When I was writing and doing book tour stuff, I was more so trying to get on everyone's program. Now, I like getting invites, but saluting myself. Sorry about that. So I don't see it anymore. Sorry, I must have passed your comment. Somebody asked me about the oh, thank you so much. I think Horatio just sent another one. Thank you, Horatio. Salute. You're really helping me out here. I appreciate that. Russell Brand, I mean, my opinion on it is that, you know, in the final analysis, I don't agree with corporations, monopolies, even, you know, government, the US government as a repressive apparatus, taking away livelihoods based on allegations. Now, I will say that these allegations appear to have a lot of substance to them, but nonetheless, I don't agree with that. On the other hand, though, Russell Brand, look, I'm not making this distinction to say that in the final analysis, we shouldn't oppose YouTube demonetizing everybody on the basis of whoever YouTube doesn't like, they get to, or any of these, you know, big tech firms, whatever they don't like, they can just take them off. No, because I know the impact that that's had on voices telling the truth. So no, I don't agree with that. Now, on the other hand, and this is I think separate from the issue, is that, you know, Russell Brand, for all of his great qualities, I think Russell Brand has also, you know, he just does a lot of things I don't agree with. Like, he focuses on, I mean, first, I think his focus has kind of gone off a bit. But for all the good qualities that he has, which I would defend, you know, his opposition to US and Western interventionism, for all of that, I say salute, and we should not support the censorship regime as it attempts to lump everyone together that opposes, especially the foreign policy establishment. That cannot be allowed to stand. So that's ultimately my position. In terms of, you know, I don't really do the COVID stuff or anything like that. For me, you know, I think it's an unfortunate reality that we live in, where we have prominent personalities and really rich people in the main kind of steering conversations that ultimately go nowhere and then lead to these conflicts, which I ultimately think, in the final analysis, regardless, you know, of where you stand on the issue, it is a big distraction from the enemy, the real true enemy. Like, we are getting caught up on issues that take us away, that put us into partisan boxes, either directly or indirectly, and say, well, we got to support the guy that says the right thing on COVID. We got to support the guy that says the right thing on this one issue, while the other one is a fascist, and vice versa. I think that's the wrong approach. I think we need to talk about how there is one uniparty, one oligopoly, one corporate capitalist imperialist elite, led by the neocons, but not specifically only the neocons. It really is an elite that is driving all of these developments, and we need to, of course, oppose them on principle. We need to oppose the censorship of, you know, independent media. That's just a given. So that's really my take on the Russell Brand situation. You know, for all of the disagreements I might have with Russell Brand, and including on his behavior that has been alleged, that stuff is just despicable and should not be apologized for or even washed over. I think we should have these kind of conversations. We should be like, hey, this guy's a prominent personality. He's, you know, he's done some good work, but at the same time, this is a problem. This is a problem that goes on. So we should probably talk about that problem too. But unfortunately, we can't, because this is all being discussed and debated and resolved in the court of the elite, in their corners, right? We don't have our own spaces that we own. We create our own spaces within those that we don't own. And that leads to inherent problems. And so I am trying not to get caught up in it. And so my position is pretty firm. I am not going to support the censor, even if I don't like Russell Brand. I'm not going to support. I know the reasons for why now he's coming under target, so I'm not going to support that. And I'm also not going to compare him to Julian Assange, right? Like, I'm not going to do that because I don't think they're the same. I think there's a distinction that can be made, but it's secondary to the most prominent issue here is that, you know, we're being led into having to talk about this. And that's what angers me is that, yeah, this shouldn't be happening. But now a lot of people are talking about it because it is happening. And so we can't even have real conversations about, well, how should we as maybe prominent public personalities, independent media, if we're attached to social movements, how should we really be behaving? We can't even have that conversation. That conversation isn't even that helpful publicly as a media, in media. But it's hard to have that conversation at all when we're constantly running around in circles about who's getting censored, who's getting repressed versus who's not getting, like the Twitter files, an absolute joke to me. To me, the Twitter files were a joke. Oh, conservatives are the only ones being suppressed. Absolutely not. That to me was being manipulated and doctored. It might be an unpopular opinion. And certainly I don't reject or negate all of what was, I think we learned important things from the Twitter files, but I think it's a joke given the history of the United States, the reality of the United States, of the collective West, what we already know, what they do, to think that there's some kind of partisan project of repression. And that's kind of where we're getting to right now. And it's a problem. It's a real problem. So it runs the gambit. And so I don't generally comment on those issues, but that's my opinion. You know, I tend to take more nuanced opinions. They're not going to be clickbaity opinions of, oh, I support Russell Brand 100%. You know, I reserve my 100% support for those who I think are serving in the main. I think Russell Brand's done good work. I don't disparage the guy in the totality, but I know he's done a lot of good work, and I know he has also done not so good work, like his media program. Like, I probably wouldn't listen to 90% of it. I think 90% of it isn't really going to be helpful. I think he's gone into this self-help lane, and I get it from his history of addiction, but that's just not what I find worthwhile to our collective process. So for me, you know, he should not be demonetized for that. And he shouldn't be demonetized for allegations. And at the same time, though, and this is what we're going to have to wrestle with, should those allegations lead, and I don't think they will, there might be statute of limitations. I don't know. I don't know the details of the allegations. I only know that they sound pretty bad. I don't know if there'll be any criminal proceedings. Probably not. I think they're for some documentary, which to me felt a little slimy, but I also understand the nuances of what happens when people go through things like rape and sexual assault. Like, I know that it's not so simple that people just go to the police and, you know, everything works out. It doesn't really work like that in the West. So with all of that said, you know, we're going to have to deal with the nuances of, like, what happens when YouTube's your employer, because that's what it is. It shouldn't be. We shouldn't be relying, and I don't think Russell Brand does. I think he's got plenty of money. So I think for people who actually do rely on YouTube revenue, people like myself to some degree, although I also rely mostly on supporters. But for people who rely on YouTube revenue for their livelihoods, we're going to have to wrestle with the fact that YouTube, despite the fact that it should be a public utility, is your employer. And then what happens when you anger your employer? Do you have to be unionized? Do you have to be collectively organized? Do you have to find ways to make transparent what it means to have your boss be some Silicon Valley should be public utility? Yeah, probably so. And so in this age of the gig economy and the way that capitalism has shaped out, I think we're going to have to really talk about things like nationalization, like making it a public utility, and things like unionization of people like us, so that it is not just simply these corporations running the show. You know, at least those are going to have to be the struggles. Unfortunately, a case like Russell Brand, while it does have principles that we should be discussing and debating, it doesn't really get us there. That's my opinion. All right, everybody. I got more Horatio Spinelli, thanks so much. So many contributions from Horatio. Thanks so much. Thank you so much for your help toward growing this program, because I am growing this program. It is going to grow. It's going to continue. I've been very pleased by it. I appreciate it. So that's my opinion. That's my opinion. And we'll probably get into this stuff when I am on Due Dissidence tomorrow, because that's, this program isn't a geopolitical program, although we'll probably talk about Zelensky at the United Nations and stuff like that. But I want to post it again because I want you guys to watch this program, because you'll get a sense of who I am. You're not always going to agree with my opinions. And surely even many in the independent media community won't agree with my opinions. But you know what? They're my opinions, and I think that they can be backed up by facts. And most importantly, I think they can be backed up not just by facts, but also by strategic thinking. Like, if we're interested in changing things, being a part of changing things, we need to think strategically as well. We can't always just be running around looking for the most pure position, because that's what a lot of people in independent media, people who follow independent media, people who maybe come out of the duopoly very frustrated, still are looking for that. Sorry, I need to hide that comment. Sorry, Horatio. Thanks for the support, though. Yeah. That's what people are looking for. They're looking for things. And I see some people in the comments being like, it's okay to rape women for brand. No, it's not. And so I'm not even opposed. If YouTube is the employer, if we're talking about it in those terms. But unfortunately, YouTube is a public utility as well that has set a political precedent, right? If we get caught in public doing what Russell Brand did, if I did that, if I were employed somewhere, let's say like for my part-time gig as a therapist, if my practice found out that I did what Russell Brand did, I would be fired. Is that correct? Well, there are consequences to bad behavior, especially deplorable behavior like that. On the other hand, though, we're talking about YouTube. We're talking about big tech firms that control a public utility that people are making revenue off of, that exemplify, I think, a bigger problem, which is, unlike the case of me doing that behavior and getting fired by my practice, we're talking about a company that has been repressing narratives, ideas, independent journalists, etc., on the basis of politics. And so that's why this issue is more nuanced than just Russell Brand's a bad dude, he should be punished. I'm not saying he shouldn't be punished. I think if these things are true, and it seems like they probably are, dude probably should be punished. I don't like that stuff. I'm zero tolerance, absolutely not. But we also have to talk about the bigger issue here. The bigger issue is should YouTube be able to, for whatever reason, be able to do this? A lot of people are saying no. A lot of people who follow me say no. I think it could be more nuanced than that, but then we're talking about a monopoly we have no control over, and that's the big problem. It's not a public utility. It's not nationalized. We don't live in a system where, even if it, we don't live in a system where that's the case right now. So that's why the debate is so hot. In any event, everyone, I'm getting a little off topic. I don't want to stay on any longer because I legitimately can't. So all of this is to say, it's been a great stream. I'll be back on Tuesday. And this is the question, Leo. I don't think YouTube is an employer. I'm just going to throw that out there. I don't think it is. I don't think it would see it. I think that's the problem with the gig economy. It does employ people, but I don't think it is. I think that's how the gig economy gets out of things. Like, we are contractors. We're doing things on our own. The ad revenue that we get is just like a little perk for using it, using this platform. So that's the problem. I think that's the big issue here. So we can't resolve these issues. I'm a contractor. When I file my taxes, I don't file as YouTube my boss. And that's It's probably got to change. That's got to change in many ways. It's got to change with Uber. It's got to change with everything where this is the problem. It's got to change. Anyway, Tuesday, Scott Ritter, 8:30 p.m. Eastern time. What day is that? The 26th, day after Yom Kippur, if you celebrate that. And let me just share one more time. Do dissidents, all right? Subscribe to the channel too for some interesting commentary. You know, some of you might agree with it, some of you might not. Interesting commentary on domestic developments. We should have some fun. 9 a.m. Eastern time tomorrow. And I'll see you all Tuesday. And of course, clips in the meantime and announcements to come on future guest appearances and streams and what have you. Okay. All right, everybody. I will see you all Tuesday, September 26th, 8:30 p.m. Eastern. Scott Ritter. Bye-bye. And before you go, thank you, Where? Video description. Support my program. Patreon, Substack, YouTube. Buy me a coffee, what have you. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.